Netflix, Tidying Up. It features Marie Kondo. You probably remember she kind of hit the scene a couple years ago with her book, The Japanese Art of Tidying Up. And in the show, she visits people's homes and helps them kind of organize and tidy up their homes. In fairness, I really think the show should be called Discarding Stuff, the art of getting rid of things. Because really, most of her focus is encouraging people to take a hard look at what they have and get rid of anything that they don't really need. So the first thing she has people do is to take all their clothes out of the closets, out of the drawers, every article of clothing they own, and put it in a big pile. And then pick up each piece of clothing one by one and see if it sparks joy. And if it doesn't spark joy, it goes on the discard pile. People have real trouble kind of getting around that because they go down all sorts of rabbit holes. Well, this doesn't really fit anymore, but maybe it will fit someday in the future. Or, I really need this to wear into such and such. Or, but once they learn how to focus on just the simple question about whether or not something sparks joy, they find that they can get rid of somewhere between half and 2/3 of their clothes. Now, I tried this yesterday morning. I got up early, piled everything I own on the bed, and went through it, and dang, it works. 2/3 of my clothes out. Stuff I hadn't worn, stuff that still had tags on it that I bought years ago, just never got around to wearing, stuff that I've been holding on to for I don't know what reason. And so it was a really fascinating experiment. As I watched the show, though, I started to sense that there was more going on than just getting rid of stuff and getting organized. Couples, the first episode I think featured a couple who found that their relationship got better. They were able to talk to each other more honestly, more openly. The relationship was more life-giving as they went through this process of tidying up. Other families found that they just felt happier in their home, that another couple who wanted to have another child felt a lot more comfortable once they got through with the process and thinking about bringing another life into the world. I went and downloaded her book called The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up and just inhaled it in one sitting. It's a fascinating book, and she does say it really isn't about the tidying up. It is about getting in touch with what is life-giving, what brings you joy in this life, and living the life that you really want to live. She says, going through all of your things and surrounding yourself with only things that spark joy helps you to address all the other things in your life that you've been kind of ignoring. It helps you to live the life that you're really wanting to live. It is life transforming. She says, for instance, that just because an article of clothing has come into your life doesn't mean that it has to be worn until it's threadbare. Maybe if you never put it on, or you wore it once or twice and decided it wasn't for you, the role of that piece of clothing was to teach you what you do and don't like. It played a valuable role, and it's all right to let it go now. It has played its role. Similarly, she says, there are people who come into your life that you will not fall in love with, that you will not like. There are people that you really won't be able to stand. And that's all right. They had a role as well. They helped you figure out and realize who it is in your life that you really do like, who it is that you do love. It helped you understand the importance of those relationships. Now, I got kind of hooked on this because, as I mentioned before, I have been in a kind of year-long quest of trying to deal with my collection of books, which is filling up my second bedroom at home. I tried to sort through it. I got rid of boxes of them. I tried when I moved to get rid of a bunch, and I'm still just kind of overwhelmed by books. And she does have some good advice, or advice that at least resonates with me. She says if you're finding, I'm not sure she's much of a reader, I have to say. She recommends that ideally you would have no more than 30 books. That's never going to happen. But she says if you're holding on to a book because you think that you might read it sometime, She says she can tell you that sometime will never come. If you haven't read it by now, you probably aren't going to read it. Maybe you thought you wanted to read it when you first got it, but it has taught you that you didn't need it, that you didn't want to read it, and it's okay to let it go. And she says, finally, if you get rid of a book and you find later that you really, really want it, she says, fine, go out and buy it again, and then this time sit down and actually read it. So this afternoon, I'm going to take all the books off the shelves, dump them in a big pile in the room, and pick them up one by one, and see if they spark joy. Pray for me, I don't know how this is going to go. As I thought about Marie Kondo and her tidying up and discarding things and focusing on what really sparks joy in her life, and I studied our lesson this morning from Luke's Gospel about the baptism of Jesus, it strikes me that baptism is a way that we are invited to spiritually let go of things that are not sparking joy in our life. This story of the baptism of Jesus was important to the early church, and we know this because it is one of the very few stories that appears in all four of the Gospels. Only Luke and Matthew have any details about Jesus' birth, about the Nativity. Only one of the miracle stories, the feeding of the 5,000, appears in all four Gospels. Very few of Jesus' parables and other stories appear in all four of the Gospels, but this story of the baptism of Jesus appears in all four Gospels, so we know it was important to the early church. John the Baptist is an Old Testament style prophet living out in the desert. He wears weird clothes, he eats bugs, he's a kind of an unpleasant individual. If you go out and see him, he yells at you to repent, but for whatever reason, people still stream out of the cities by the hundreds to go hear John the Baptist preach and to be baptized by him in the River Jordan. He invites you down into the River Jordan, which really is just a muddy kind of stream. It was never a great river. And he pushes you underneath the surface of the water, and just as you think you may drown, just as you're feeling that kind of pounding feeling because you need some air, he lets you back up, and as you come out of the water, somehow you have a sense that everything you took with you down into that water, all of your past sins, your past regrets, all of the things you've done wrong in this life, all the things that you're holding on to that aren't life-giving have been washed away. And you're able to live a new life. You're able to embrace the new life that God holds out for you. The early church adopted this practice of baptism as the means in which you joined the church. And so for the first several hundred years after Jesus' life and ministry on earth, the early church practiced adult baptism. You would enter into a period of prayer and study which might last a year or more. And then during the period of Lent, that 6 weeks leading up to Easter, you would enter into even more in-depth study and prayer and instruction and devotion. And then at the Easter Vigil, that long service the night before Easter Sunday, the bishop would ask you some questions like, will you continue in the apostles' teaching and fellowship, in the breaking of bread and in the prayers? Will you persevere in resisting evil? Will you proclaim by word and example the good news of God in Christ? Will you seek and serve Christ in all people, loving your neighbor as yourself? And you would respond to those questions, I will, with God's help. The bishop would then lead you into a pool of water or a river or a pond and push you underneath the surface so you would feel like you were drowning, you were dying to your old self. And when you come up out of that water, your past is washed away. Everything you carry down into that water with you is gone. And you're ready to embrace the new life that God offers you. And you became a full member of the church. Now in the Middle Ages, it became the practice of the church to baptize infants. And I have to say, I love baptizing babies. It's one of the great blessings of this job. But I do wonder sometimes if it isn't somewhat of a loss that we baptize infants instead of adults, because we miss out on that period of reflection and prayer. We miss out on the intentionality that an adult would bring to that decision. And when we baptize infants, the promises are made, those same questions are asked, but they're answered on the infant's behalf by the child's parents and godparents. Later, when they're a teenager or an adult, they confirm those promises that were made on their behalf in front of the bishop at confirmation. And that's good, but I still wonder if we aren't missing out on something by baptizing infants instead of adults. The church has set aside, because so many of us were baptized as infants and have no recollection of that event. The church sets aside days like today when we remember Jesus' baptism as a moment for us to reflect on our own baptism. And I wonder if the invitation today isn't to do some sort of spiritual inventory. So my suggestion to all of us is that we take everything we're carrying around with us inside and make a big pile of it. Think about the resentments that you're holding on to, things that you think were done to you wrongly. Think about your vision of the future, which actually is just a memory of the past that you can't really return to, that you're never going to get back. What about that sense of inadequacy that you have been hauling around for years? What about all the negative things that have been said to you by people, all the negative things you've said to yourself? What about your addictions to money or things or alcohol or whatever it is? What about your knee-jerk ways of reacting to your spouse or to your children that are not life-giving, that are not healthy, that are not loving? What about that self-image that you have of yourself, which is not affirming? Put all that in a pile and pick each of those things up one by one and see if it sparks joy. And if it doesn't, let it go. Baptism is an invitation to let all that go, to let it all be washed away. I think if we're able to do that, if we're able to cut through all the things that we're carrying around with us, we'll be able to hear that voice from heaven that says, "You are my child. With you I am well pleased." That, I think, is the gift of our baptism. That is the gift of this day, this season of Epiphany. And I invite us to take a look at what we're carrying around and let things go if they are not life-giving, so that we can live into the children of God that we are called to be. We are children of God with whom God is well pleased. Amen.